No, that's not good.
It's Tuesday, September 22nd, and we are here today for a virtual hearing on an order for hearing regarding a current state of cooperative housing in Boston and strategies for its further expansion. Councillor Kenzie Bach is the sponsor of this docket. It was referred to the committee on February 5th, 2020. In accordance with the Governor Baker's March 12th executive order modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law, the City Council will be conducting its hearing via virtual Zoom. This allows the City Council, to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to public health accommodations. The public may watch this meeting via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv. It also will be rebroadcasted at a later date on Comcast 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email or to juan.lopez@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. I am now going to turn it over. Before I turn it over to the lead sponsor for today's hearing, I wanted to note that we have been joined by Councillors Braden, of course, the lead sponsor, Councillor Bach, Councillor Wu, Councillor Baker, and of course myself. Councillor Bach, I'll turn it over to you shortly. But I also wanted to just tell folks that this is not a controversial topic. This is something actually I think you're going to find a lot of support around. So the goal of today's hearing is really to talk about what we can do together. And as such, to my colleagues and to the panelists, I'm really going to push you to kind of get to the point and such that, we don't really need huge presentations, 3 to 5 minutes from the panelists, and then pausing for some questions from my colleagues, again, even limiting those to some questions to really learn what we can do together. Councillor Bach, I see your hand is raised. I think, somehow you got out of the hearing, that's why. And Sheila Dillon has also joined us, so there. Councillor Bach, are you here?
Yes, I got ejected, but I'm back.
I don't know how, sorry about that. I don't know how that happened. But what we'll do is we'll go ahead and turn it over to Councillor Bach for some very brief opening remarks, and any of my colleagues have any very brief opening remarks. Then we're really going to learn from the experts in the room and turn it over to the panelists.
Thank you so much, Councillor Edwards. I'm thrilled to be having this hearing today. Back on February 5th, I actually gave my maiden speech about cooperative housing. And so this hearing's been a while coming. We've had a pandemic intervene. But one of the things that I think it's really illustrative of is that, when I was talking about cooperative housing in February, it was as, how you find stable ways to keep people of all means in the city in a red hot market. And now, many months later, we're talking about, how could you take advantage if you ended up with, apartment buildings that were at risk of foreclosure or sale, how could you stabilize housing? And I think what's relevant there is that co-op housing is a kind of evergreen tool. And that's precisely because it's designed to really think about housing in a way that isn't first market driven, but is first kind of people driven and about our communities. And I am lucky enough as the councillor for District 8 to know well a number of cooperative housing buildings, including some very large ones like the Charles Bank in Mission Hill, West End Place in West End, and a bunch of amazing ones in the Fenway that have existed for a long time and have provided that kind of stable housing through many market cycles to a really diverse set of people who have, I would say, pretty consistently made themselves really active members of our civic life here in the city. So as Councillor Edwards said, the purpose of today, from my perspective, is really how do we support this, and how do we go from thinking about co-ops as kind of a nice, unique, unusual thing that's in a few pockets and corners to a real tool that the city could support that would represent a kind of flourishing of economic democracy and, again, a kind of repositioning of housing in a way that's focused first and foremost on anchoring people in community. So I'm thrilled about the folks who have joined us today, both Matt and John from the Mass Association of Housing Cooperatives. It's no surprise that people who are actively involved in the governance of their residential life are also very actively involved in the governance of their associational life. And so we've got a great set of sort of resident co-op leaders and experts. And then excited to have Chief Dillon and her team from D&D joining us, Bill Bronner from CDAC, and then a great panel to talk about the sort of finance aspects. So Maggie Cohn, another constituent of mine, the National Co-op Bank is joining us, and I think we've got Grant Young from the Symphony Renaissance Trust. So it's, to the chair's point, it's really a set of panelists who know the nuts and bolts here. And I think the number one question we want to look at today is what tools and ecosystem and city, programming and support could we put in place to really help our existing co-ops flourish, but also help us get more co-ops and think about how to transform our residential life in the city in the long term with this set of tools. So with that, I'll give it back to you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for hosting this today.
Thank you. Councillor Braden.
I'm going to keep it very brief. I'm here to learn more about co-ops. I know we used to have 2 in the neighbourhood. I'm not sure they're co-ops anymore, so I'm really excited to learn more. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just also want to thank Councillor Bach for bringing this to us to discuss here. Really looking forward to it, ways that I could maybe bring this into my district. I'm not sure if I have any co-ops in my district, but have been interested in the topic. Maybe interesting to see how we could, as a city, talking with Sheila and D&D, how we could maybe implement this in the NIH model, a neighborhood NHI model rather than neighborhood housing, because it builds ultimately, if we can do co-ops we're selling home ownership, that really stabilizes families and neighborhoods. So thank you, Councillor Bach.
And we've also been joined by Councillor Sabi George. Councillor Sabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the sponsor today and this sort of continued conversation around the role that co-ops can play in our city and, as Councilor Baker said, strengthen our neighborhoods and strengthen our families and create stability for our families across the city. So just happy to continue my learning about this topic and ways that I can sort of embrace and then encourage this across our city, because I think that there's some general agreement that this is a good thing for our city, but how do we make it and realize it in a greater way across our neighborhoods as opposed to just the few pockets in which it exists. So happy to be here and very interested in learning more and encouraging this citywide. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I apologize to my colleagues. I skipped over Councillor Wu, who was here. And the order for questions, just so everyone's clear on the future, it would be the co-sponsor, or the sponsor, excuse me, Councillor Bach, then Councillor Braden, then Councillor Wu, then Councillor Baker, and then Councillor Sabi George. See, Councillor Baker, I don't always skip you. I skipped Councillor Wu today, too.
And Councillor Flynn has also joined us, Chair Edwards.
Councillor Flynn has also joined us, but before Councillor Flynn, Councillor Wu, my apologies.
No, I don't have much to add anyway. I just wanted to say thank you for hosting and for to our colleague for sponsoring, fully in support of whatever we can do on the ground tactically to make sure this works, particularly as mentioned before, during this new kind of economic situation and struggle where we have an opportunity in some ways to get in there and make sure we're connecting housing stability across our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards, and to the maker for sponsoring this important hearing. And like Councillor Sabi George mentioned, I'm here to learn more about the proposal. And that's the great thing about calling for city council hearings. You have the opportunity to continue to learn about different issues and learning from other cities as well on best practices. So again, want to say thank you to the makers and to Councillor Edwards for your exceptional work on housing issues. Thank you, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. So our first panel, if I've gotten all my colleagues, Our first panel includes Jonathan Stewart, President of the Massachusetts Association of Housing Cooperatives, Matt Thal, Vice President of the Massachusetts Association of Housing Cooperatives, Sheila Dillon, Chief of Housing and Director of DND, and Tim Davis, Deputy Director of Policy Development and Research at DND, and Bill Bronner, Director of Housing Preservation and Policy, the Community Economic Development Assistance Corporation, CDAC. So we were going to go ahead and have each panelist speak a little bit, 3 to 5 minutes, kind of explaining their thoughts, their goals, and then we will open up for one round from the colleagues, then we'll go on to the second panel. Because DND has a time crunch, we may go ahead and allow for a second round with them if need be. So I'll go ahead and we'll start with Jonathan Stewart.
Good afternoon, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Bach, and members of the City Council. It's a privilege to testify this afternoon on behalf of housing cooperatives and affordability, particularly relating to the City of Boston and the needs of our residents. Massachusetts Association of Housing Cooperatives is a statewide nonprofit dedicated to assisting existing co-ops to thrive and to help new co-ops to be formed and developed. Now in our 5th year, we grew out of a prior legislative battle. We are champions of the tenants' opportunity to purchase bill now in the legislature, a bill filed by Representative Cullinane on behalf of the City of Boston. TOPA holds the potential to facilitate the conversion of thousands of units of Boston's rental apartments each year to permanent affordability as co-ops and other housing types. Housing cooperatives are a type of shared ownership, multifamily housing with property held in common, dedicated to self-governance. The varieties of co-ops are able to adapt to and serve many divergent needs of residents in their communities. They date back more than 100 years, originating in England, and are widely used and appreciated around the world. This pattern holds true in Boston, where we have something under 100 highly varied housing cooperatives with many thousands of residents scattered throughout most neighborhoods. I don't know if it's possible for the graphic, which I'd supplied earlier, to be featured, but perhaps at a later date that can come up. Our co-ops stretch from Brighton to Dorchester and Forest Hills to Charlestown. Unfortunately, you can't see the map prepared for us by the planning department at UMass Boston, but I will return to that at the end of my speech. Co-ops are hiding in plain sight and quietly contributing to their neighborhoods. We have co-ops in triple deckers and factories, towers and converted apartment buildings, and they serve many needs and purposes, the full range of incomes and occupations in Boston. Today, we're focusing on limited equity and affordable housing types, which provide some of the most secure, stable, low turnover, and affordable housing in the city. The direct participation of resident owners in the management and governance of their co-ops and their community orientation and involvement can lead to great efficiencies and some of the lowest costs available for co-op creation and ongoing operations. We are proud of this, but also know that co-ops can contribute at far greater levels to the needs of residents and the objectives of the city. Lack of needed resources means that every year, hundreds of residential units and millions of dollars in economic activity are not getting built, maintained, or sold. The City of Boston has a large, commendable track record of helping co-ops to form and stay in good repair, preserving our stock of affordable housing and protecting residents from displacement. We value the ongoing relationship with the Department of Neighborhood Development and Chief Dillon, and we want to strengthen and expand on this. We see the following areas as a place where the city has the ability to make a profound difference for housing co-ops to preserve and expand our stock of affordable housing from lower incomes, now called essential workers, through workforce and on to our stressed middle-income families. We were in a profound housing crisis prior to the pandemic, and the stresses since have only increased the importance of getting this right. Some of our requests have been enacted at times in Boston, some in other communities, and there remains a tremendous opportunity for Boston to innovate and lead. Primarily, we seek to build on existing activities and to achieve parity and inclusion with other housing types, but the format and structure of co-ops means that some adjustments are needed in some areas. The foremost issue here is banking and financing. Even though housing co-ops are among the safest of real estate investments, with extraordinarily low rates of non-performance and foreclosure, banking services are highly limited. Too few banks offer loans of any type. Terms are onerous and processes lengthy. Because of this, too many deals fail. Banking needs generally fall into the categories of mortgage and development loans, capital improvement loans, and individual share purchase loans. Share loans to individuals, particularly for limited equity and affordable co-ops, while for the smallest amounts are the most scarce of these loans. For mortgage and development loans, the city can help by participating in housing finance, even if in small and pre-development elements of it, helping deals to prove viability and come together, and demonstrating support, possibly by contributing land at discount, which increases affordability. The city can expand its current assistance to us in our efforts to convince developers, banks, and financiers that housing co-ops are good investments. Leverage can be exerted with banks that have community reinvestment obligations, and the city can examine its own sources of capital for suitability, such as from the Community Preservation Act funds, the city's own credit union, and pension funds. And these can take positions in co-op projects. The city can develop market-oriented programs and materials to encourage co-op development and investment targeted to development professionals and the financial industry. And this also ties into ongoing related needs for funds to refinance and for capital improvement, which housing co-ops periodically need. We would like to see many of the tools and programs of D&D's Home Center be made available and modified to assist individuals and families seeking to join housing co-ops, including educational materials, classes, down payment assistance for shares, and access to loan providers, particularly for affordable and limited equity co-ops. The lack of these tools hobbles co-ops' ability to recruit new residents and to continue reflecting the diversity of their neighborhoods and economic range. The city can also directly assist this by capitalizing independent share loan program providers. There is a related need for educational resources and training to assist housing co-ops to better educate and select their residents, to develop better governance and managerial practices, including long-term financial planning. These low-cost actions will greatly stabilize and strengthen and preserve Boston's affordable housing. Lastly, the city can continue to assist housing co-ops by engaging in and further directing research and analysis of Boston's housing co-ops, helping to demonstrate their advantages, viability, success, and challenges, and their future promise to provide more and better affordable housing. In recent years, we have worked with students and programs at Harvard, MIT, and UMass, and gleaned data from other sources, but much essential work remains to better understand and communicate the many benefits of housing co-ops and their contributions to affordability. I thank you for your time. Matt Thal, my vice president, will be expanding on some of this and making further points. We look forward to your thoughts and questions now and in the future. Thank you.
Matt Thal.
Thank you again, councilors, for your participation and leadership here. I would like to focus my remarks today on a basic description of housing cooperatives. For some of you, you will know a lot of this, but the fact is that many legislators have only a vague idea of what a housing cooperative is, even though we have a large number of Bostonians living in cooperatives. Much of the co-op housing is targeted and is considered affordable to low, moderate, and middle-income households. Housing co-ops are the preeminent form of resident-controlled multifamily housing. And co-ops can exist in many forms. They are in apartment buildings, they can be in townhouses or row houses, they can be in 1 to 4 family homes, they can be in clusters of 3-deckers, they can even be in aggregations of condominium units. So it's not really the type of real estate, but the legal form of the cooperative. And there is basically one legal structure for a bona fide housing cooperative. A cooperative is a corporation that owns residential real estate. The stockholders in the corporation have the right to occupy a housing unit owned by the corporation, and the only stockholders are the residents of the cooperative. The co-op stockholders are typically referred to shareholders or members of the cooperative. The members' right to live in the cooperative are documented in a rental agreement, typically referred to as a proprietary lease. Households joining the cooperative must be approved by the co-op's board of directors. So thus, a co-op is a hybrid of renting and owning. The members of the cooperative are tenants of the co-op corporation, and by virtue of having a lease and being subject to all of the obligations and rights specified in the lease and the law. The members are owners by virtue of being stockholders in the corporation. Like stockholders in any corporation, the members elect the corporation's board of directors, which oversees the management of the corporation. The rent paid by the members covers virtually all of the operating costs of the housing, including property insurance, taxes, and the mortgage payments that cover the entire property owned by the cooperative. Members are typically permitted to make alterations and improvements to their homes as long as those are approved by the co-op's board of directors. And such improvements are typically recovered by the member at the time that they sell their interest in the co-op. Co-ops are inherently democratic institutions. Most co-ops adhere to the Rochdale principles of cooperative enterprise developed in England in the mid-19th century. The keystone principle, Rochdale principle, is one member, one vote, regardless of the amount of corporate stock the member owns. This assures that wealthier members cannot dominate the governance and decision-making of the cooperative community. Housing co-ops come in many flavors. The important distinction for our purposes is limited equity versus market rate co-ops. A limited equity co-op restricts the amount that the member can sell her shares for when she decides to leave the co-op. In market rate co-ops, shares can be sold for whatever the market will bear. The intent of limiting equity is to assure very long-term affordability for the income groups that the co-op was established to serve. Limited equity co-ops are specifically established to remove a property from speculative real estate market and are generally not suitable for people who regard their housing primarily as an investment. Some housing advocates recognize what are sometimes termed zero equity co-ops. These are properties, often a very large single-family house or a 2 to 3 unit house that operates as a group house. The residents do not have any formal ownership and therefore own no shares or stock in the entity that owns the property. Most of these arrangements are not legal cooperatives. However, it is possible for a group of individuals or families to incorporate as a cooperative and enter into a long-term lease of the property. And such arrangements are referred to as leasing cooperatives. How are co-ops created? Many co-ops are formed through the conversion of rental housing. It could be a landlord seeking to sell the property to his tenants. It could be a bank that has foreclosed on a rental property seeking to sell it to the tenants, or it could be the tenants approaching the landlord or a bank seeking to buy the property. There are a number of tenant conversion cooperatives in Boston. They include the Jamaica Way Townhouses and Towers, the Fenway Artist Studios, Charles Bank Homes Cooperative, and Warren Gardens, to name a few. Co-ops are also created de novo or from scratch through the development of a new building or a substantial rehabilitation of a vacant building or a building that is being repurposed from non-residential uses. Examples of such newly created co-ops in Boston are West End Place, Alexander Magnolia Homes, and the Fensgate Cooperative. However co-ops are created, skilled professionals with specific experience in cooperative law, finance, management, and operation are critical to successful development of a housing co-op. Unfortunately, at the present moment, the number of such professionals in the Commonwealth is quite small. Financing of housing cooperatives can be complicated. This is an area where the hybrid and chameleon-like nature of co-ops really comes into play. The bank will tend to look at the initial financing of a co-op as rental housing and would provide a first mortgage that is 60 to 75% of what the bank concludes the value of the property. The balance of the financing will have to come from junior mortgages, generally provided by a public agency, and or equity. What the co-op members put into the pot from their purchase of co-op shares and stock constitutes equity in the cooperative. For the prospective members, the share purchase price is usually best understood as their investment in home ownership, similar to what would be a down payment on a home purchase. Co-ops that are developed as affordable housing serving low and moderate income households face some major challenges with this financing model. Few banks in Massachusetts have provided mortgages to housing co-ops. The lenders do not understand this form of real estate well, and there is a great deal of nervousness about providing a large mortgage to a new company that is owned entirely by people who may never have owned a home or carried a mortgage. Even when a bank is willing to make the mortgage loan, the loan will rarely exceed 60% of the cost of developing the co-op, having a very large amount of equity that must be supplied by members of the co-op. The public sector can ease this somewhat by providing very patient loans that could bring the total amount of financing higher. However, if the city and state are providing funding at levels typically provided for affordable rental housing, the equity bite, the cost of co-op shares will be too high for most people. This problem can only be solved by providing financing and grants to co-op members to cover a large part of their share price, or bringing in a private equity partner that will co-own the property with the cooperative. Sources for these loans to co-op purchasers are extremely rare, and equity partners in affordable housing have proven to be extremely reluctant to invest in housing cooperatives. It is likely that these hurdles can be cleared as housing cooperatives become better understood by lenders, developers, and real estate investors. The financing obstacles have been surmounted in cities where co-ops are more commonplace, such as New York, Washington, D.C., and Minneapolis. Co-ops can and should be one of the pieces of the puzzle for expanding affordable housing in Boston. Most of the housing co-ops in our city have flourished quietly under the radar. They are attractive because they offer the very best features of renting and home ownership. Co-ops have been very stable and experience quite low resident turnover. Many co-ops are strong, thriving communities within the city's neighborhoods. It seems that a disproportionately large number of community and civic leaders and activists are members of housing cooperatives. Truth be told, some co-ops have failed in Boston. Co-ops that have encountered financial, governance, or participation difficulties have been converted to condominiums or reverted to rental housing. This is largely because co-ops tend to operate in isolation and the absence of a support infrastructure. The scarcity of experienced professionals can lead to a downward spiral of problems rather than a rescue. One of the greatest predictors of co-op failure is inadequate training of the initial members and board and ongoing training of board members. Indeed, if we are going to grow co-op housing sector in Boston, training and education all around has to be the first step. Thanks.
Thank you. Chief Dillon?
So I will be 45 seconds because I'm here with a really talented team. Teresa Gallagher, who lives in the Fenway Co-op, Tim Davis, who loves co-ops, and Maureen Flynn from Homeowner Services. But I just wanted to say thank you very much to Councillor Bach and Councillor Edwards for holding this hearing. I believe in co-ops. I love co-ops. I love everything about co-ops. It's stable housing. You create stable neighborhoods full of really interesting people, and it takes property oftentimes out of the speculative market. They're good on so many levels. And I was a project manager on Alexander Magnolia Co-op. I've worked on artist housing, the co-ops there, and the people and the dedication and the enthusiasm the residents bring to co-ops is, I don't think you can replicate it in other settings. My high level takeaway is this: every year we put out funding for co-ops. We provide training, we provide, loans to existing co-ops. We do what we should. But I think the city needs some entity, some developer type, some resident groups that wake up every single day thinking about how to increase co-ops in the city. Because it just doesn't seem to be the infrastructure anymore that there was 20, 30 years ago. So there's, we have talented nonprofits, we've got talented for-profits providing a lot of affordable housing in Boston, but we don't have, and I love the co-op board, but we need a developer who really is dedicated to creating new co-ops for the city. So I'll leave you with that, and I'm going to hand this over to Tim Davis, but I just want to say that I'm really excited about a renewed conversation about co-ops, and I'd like to put my head together with all of you and figure out how we really create a healthy pipeline. So I'll hand it over to Tim. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, before you go, is Maureen and Teresa also speaking as well?
They're here for questions.
Got you. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Chairperson Edwards. Also, thank you, Councillor Bach, for sponsoring this, as well as Councillors Baker, Braden, Wu, Anasabi George, and Councillor Flynn for attending. For the record, I'm Tim Davis, Deputy Director for Policy Development and Research at D&D. I really have to thank Jonathan and Matt for their remarks because they really shortened what I need to say here because they've given us a really good primer on what the industry looks like today. And I want to say that the Housing iLab recently took a look at cooperatives. They found that there were over 2,200 cooperative units spread out across 60 plus properties in Boston, which makes up a little bit less than 1% of the city's housing stock. And I know that you'll ask, why aren't there more co-ops in Boston? What can we do to create more? The iLab found, and I think these have already been mostly brought up, the following challenges that co-op housing finds in Boston. One is around financing. Residents form the co-op organization and secure a blanket mortgage for the property. Relative to other housing models, banks and CDCs are less enthusiastic about co-ops and less likely to sign on. Each resident needs to obtain a share loan to cover the upfront cost of becoming a shareholder in the co-op corporation. Share loans cannot be secured against property, and there are few institutions willing to offer them. On the property management and governance side, co-op residents take on more responsibility, upkeep, security, budgeting, new resident recruitment, et cetera, which can result in low reserves, significant rehab needs, and even reversion away from a co-op model. Resident control of many major decisions, such as rent increases and maintenance, is a compelling reason to join a co-op that can stretch residents thin and does not always prove to be sustainable in the long term. To address the issues raised both in our call already today and also in the study the iLab did, the Department of Neighborhood Development has identified some efforts that could help to produce more co-ops and preserve those that we have. As it regards assistance to potential buyers, looking at developing a training module to be added to the Home Buying 101 class for those looking at cooperative ownership options. I developed, and we still have, a similar module around condominium buying, a possible help with share loans, and assistance to individual members who are already co-op members, develop support and ongoing co-op member training program and board development curriculum, and assistance with cost of member upgrades to their housing co-op units. So that's for what they have responsibility for within the unit. And then in terms of assistance to existing cooperative developments, consider providing capital assistance under the annual RFP for existing limited equity cooperatives with income restrictions on some percentage of the units to help with building envelope, common area upgrades, and upgrades to unit finishes for which the cooperative is responsible. Also look to work with lenders, develop loan programs for existing cooperatives. This could include a loan guarantee program for a first mortgage to the cooperative. And of course, what I think D&D does best is actually looking at creating new income restricted housing, and we can look at doing new cooperative housing, whether it's selecting a city-owned site for development as cooperative housing, specifically assigning a site, doing a design competition for well-designed multifamily properties that keep the cost of development low and supports cooperative housing communities. And also, as Chief Dillon stated, co-ops are already well placed in our funding rounds. Currently, co-ops seeking funding from D&D have a preference.
I just want to note that we've been joined also by Councillor Mejia. Councillor Mejia, if you wanted to make some very brief remarks, we're just learning about cooperatives right now.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Edwards and Councillor Bach. Really excited to be here and joining this conversation. And Councillor Bach for calling this hearing. I know this was your inaugural hearing order. I remember it because I know that you are so deeply committed to the issues of housing. So it gives me great pleasure to be here today in support of this. One thing that stood out to me during the hearing order was the idea that co-op housing can be a bridge between people who who see housing as the place of shelter and housing as a way of the way we build capital. And as the first person in my family to buy a home, there's a shift in perception that I'm experiencing. And so we need to find ways to build generational wealth and capital in neighborhoods that have historically been prevented from doing so. And I look forward to this hearing order and learning more about Boston's co-op. I think one of the things that I'm really excited about is what Chief Dillon mentioned earlier in her remarks was this opportunity to really build community in these spaces. So it's not just about housing folks, but doing so in a way that really is creating space for us to build upon the richness that exists in the communities that we're co-creating with. So really excited to be here. Those are my brief remarks. Back to you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. Councilor, we've also been joined by Councilor Janey and Councilor Flaherty. If Councilor Janey and Councilor Flaherty, if you had brief remarks, and then we're going to continue on with our panelists in panel one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will reserve my remarks. I'm in transit now, but I just wanted to say that this is a really important conversation. I wanted to thank the makers, and hopefully I will be able to participate a little more fully when I am more settled.
Thank you. Councilor Flaherty?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and obviously thank the makers for putting this forward. I'm on record a long-time supporter of cooperative housing, so we've got some great models here in Boston. They work, and we need more of them. So look forward to hearing from folks that know it better than I do, but know that I've been a long-time supporter of it, and look forward to working together to try to get more of them.
And I'll just conclude. Again, I wanted to thank Councilor Bach for her leadership. I had the honor and privilege to work with Teresa and Tim and well, Maureen for a little bit over at DND, and definitely one of the topics has been how do we diversify what ownership is and how can we make sure there's funding behind all forms of ownership. We were looking at co-ops, tiny houses, basement homes, but everything. And I think it's pathways to ownership that bridge the wealth gap. It also stabilizes community, which is the #1 thing we're dealing with is displacement. And I believe ownership is the anchor for people to stay in their neighborhoods and to continue to work with them. I also want to give a shout out to Maggie Cohn from CFNE. I met her many years ago because I was on the board for CFNE. I believe quite firmly in cooperatives, worker cooperatives, housing co-ops. So I'm excited to see how the community can help this industry bloom. So, but Bill Bronner from CDAC was also next for this panel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councilor Bach, for the opportunity to speak this afternoon, and greetings to all the councilors present today. My name is Bill Bronner. I'm the Director of Housing Preservation and Policy at the Community Economic Development Assistance Corporation, or CDAC. CDAC is a Massachusetts quasi-public community development finance institution that provides financial resources and technical expertise for nonprofit organizations engaged in effective community development in Massachusetts. CDAC's work supports 2 key building blocks of community development: affordable housing and early care and education. CDAC is also active in state and national housing preservation policy and is recognized as a leader in the nonprofit community development industry. I should note in my remarks today that I will focus on resident-controlled housing in general and not on the specific legal ownership structure of housing cooperatives that Matt Thal described so well. Resident-controlled housing can take a number of legal forms in addition to cooperatives, the most common of which is a nonprofit housing owner whose board members are all composed of residents at the housing complex. For many years, CDAC has worked closely with DND and other city agencies on strategies to preserve the long-term affordability of the existing multifamily housing in the city. The city of Boston contains roughly 5,000 units of resident-controlled, income-restricted housing, depending on exactly which definition you use. These units are a very important component of Boston's stock of 377 complexes of privately owned, income-restricted housing with 31,000 affordable units. In its history, CDAC has provided technical or financial assistance to the vast majority of these resident-owned complexes. In particular, we've made long-term zero-interest loans to 18 developments with over 800 units of resident-controlled housing through the Housing Innovations Fund. CDAC has often provided technical assistance and financing to low-income resident-owned housing. However, CDAC has only rarely worked with moderate income and fully market rate cooperatives. So my remarks today are focused on resident-controlled housing that is income restricted. Based on CDAC's experience to date, I would like to make two recommendations. First, there's a need for additional technical assistance to support the existing resident-owned affordable housing. As today's City Council order notes, most of the city's limited equity cooperatives were formed in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. In many cases, a new generation of resident leaders has now taken the reins from the founders of these properties. City support for additional training would be very helpful, which is currently beyond the ability of CDAC to provide. Although the work of the Mass Association of Housing Cooperatives, along with other entities such as the Cooperative Development Institute and the Co-op Fund of New England are very important, Boston resident leaders would benefit from more training and technical assistance, such as is found in New York City. In New York, which of course has tens of thousands of cooperative and resident-owned housing units, organizations such as UHAB can provide a wide array of training and services to resident-controlled housing. Secondly, I also support passage of the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, Bill numbers H 1260 and S 786. TOPA would be an excellent tool for the creation of new cooperatives and resident-controlled housing. It would provide opportunities for tenants or a nonprofit chosen by the tenants to purchase their building when the owner wants to sell, and would thus help prevent displacement and gentrification. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today.
Madam Chair, you're muted.
I'm going to have a hearing on how I'm learning how to use Zoom one day, but for now, I promise you I'm in the process of doing that. And I'm cognizant of D&D's time limits, so I wanted to kind of do a quick check amongst my colleagues if there are specific questions for D&D at this time. We're going to go and ask, we have plenty of questions for all the panelists, but just for D&D in the city at this moment, just to make sure that they were not, we didn't put, you know, I see Councillor Bach's hand is raised. Councillor Bach?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just, while I'm talking briefly, throw up, I think I have a copy of the slide that John was referring to earlier. And I'll just share it just because I think it's, can you guys see that now?
Oh, good.
Yes? Okay. So just because I think it's helpful that he put together this thing to show us how many places co-ops are scattered all over the city. And as I mentioned up top, I think there's a strange thing here where to really seed a more robust co-op ecosystem, we need a kind of imagination and belief in it, but we actually have a ton of these in the city already, and they've been really successful, stable housing. So I guess my questions to D&D specifically, and I don't know if these maybe go to Maureen or what, but it seems to me like a pretty, you know, a key aspect of really making co-ops a plausible option for people would be both like, you know, what way could we provide support for share loans kind of built on top of our existing support for first-time home ownership and such? Because really a co-op share loan is a smaller slice of capital holding in the same way that when they first invented condominiums, those were a smaller slice than owning a whole house, right? And especially because as our panelists referenced, there's such a challenge in getting share loans financed at many conventional banks. I know we'll hear more about that from the banking side in the next panel, but both the share loan support and then technical assistance, right? People learning how to be a co-op resident seem like things that could potentially kind of branch off of our existing first-time homebuyer technical assistance classes and then financial assistance. And so I was wondering what conversations, if any, you all have had about that. And it's something that I would really like to see this conversation going concretely in that direction.
Sure. if you'd like me to answer, thank you for having us. We appreciate it. And those are two great questions. So I'll answer the technical assistance question first because it kind of leads into the support once you are ready to become a home buyer. So as probably many of you know, we conduct through a couple of contract agencies, Homebuyer 101, 102, 201 classes, and then we have workshops as well. I will tell you that those workshops are completely full right now. So that's great. There's a lot of people that are interested in buying still and that are able to do so from home, which probably makes it easier than running from work to class. So it's great. So in that 101, which is really about a 10-hour overview of the home buying process, and I took it, I'm sure many of you took it probably before you bought, but there are invited guests and experts in different facets of home buying, and we can absolutely add a segment within the 101 class that talks about co-op ownership. But we can also ask our providers to add in a workshop like we do for condos, and I think Tim mentioned that before. So it's very, condo ownership is a very specific thing. I had to take the class. I thought I knew everything, and then I'm like, oh, no, not really. So it's a great tool to understand how you as a home buyer fit into the larger condo association. We are very willing to do that, to do a similar workshop for co-op ownership. And so that home buyers that might be really, really interested in doing co-op ownership would be able to take that class and learn more, not just about how to get in, but then what that would mean for them in terms of belonging to a co-op structure, and what that would mean long term. So those two things we can do right away. In terms of our, we have our traditional kind of down payment assistance closing cost program. We can expand that to include the purchase of some of the shares or whatever that mechanism is. And help with home improvement. So as you all know, we also have a home improvement program, and we do allow condo owners to participate in our home improvement program. So we can do that on the home improvement side as well. We just have to figure out a mechanism, because right now we require a mortgage for the money that we lend on both of those sides. So down payment assistance and then home improvement loans. We require a promissory note and a mortgage, but in the co-op structure, that wouldn't necessarily work. So we have had internal discussions, and we'll rely on John and Matt to give us better advice or more advice about how technically to do that. Maybe offer having the corporation offer us a guarantee that the share buyer will remain as an owner-occupant member, things like that. The things that we normally require in exchange for our down payment assistance or home improvement loans. So we look forward to working with the experts on this, but we think it's very doable, and we're very willing to expand our program to both incentivize co-op ownership and support it long-term.
Great. That's all fantastic to hear. And I would love us to move forward on those things and really just lower the barriers here. And I think in the long term, it would be great, right, to go from a workshop to you have a whole co-ops 201 type class. But I think a key piece to this is making this like a real option for people, financially and in terms of in their head, like having it as a possible thing to buy into when they're looking for stable housing. So thanks so much, Maureen.
Sure, and I wanted to just mention Karen Rabaza is our not so new assistant director for home buying services, and she comes from the lending side, so she's going to be able to help us work this out too. So just wanted to mention her because she was able to get into the Zoom call. So Zoom meeting.
Great. Counselor, I'm going to move it along to Counselor Braden, who also raised her hand.
I had a quick question, and how do we identify potential properties that would be, do the tenants of those properties come to us or potentially come to us, or how would we identify properties that would make good co-op projects?
The DND.
DND, I think. Thank you.
Teresa, do you want to talk about how traditionally we have had co-ops come to us?
Sure. I think there's a couple of different strategies that we can, our request for proposals is one way in which we solicit developers who are interested in developing housing, whether it's homeownership or rental, letting them know that there are sources available to help them get something built. So that's our first, the first place in which we actually solicit development interest in housing, and then that also provides access to existing housing that needs capital investment, and in order to preserve the affordability or the tenancies, they can apply to us for assistance in that capital investment, in capital improvements as well. So our RFP is one way in which we can, and as Tim mentioned and Sheila said, we provide a preference to cooperatives. So already there is somewhat of a preference in our RFPs. That's one way that we solicit. In order to other ways in which we can do this is if we're looking at some of the land that may be city-owned land or properties that where we believe a multifamily or could deal with some level of density, and then put that out with a preference for cooperative ownership as to the development community, and let them know that, and then to let the members of existing co-ops know that there's some assistance available to them as they continue to work on their existing co-ops.
And I'll add, I think one of the things that was, having been involved with a couple of co-ops myself some years ago, I think one of the important things that we need to have both tenant organizers as well as nonprofits or CDCs to kind of have in their toolbox is that when they start working with tenants in a building that's going to be renovated and or turned into income restricted housing, that they did like what we did at Fenway CDC. We introduced the topic to the tenants that maybe they would want to be a co-op, and then we could proceed from there. So I think that that is something that's been kind of not as done by nonprofits as much now, and Teresa has her hand up.
And in addition, if the TOPA legislation is to pass, where tenants are in fact would then have the ability to purchase the properties, a cooperative structure would be a perfect avenue for them to pursue and keep control of the property, not just, you know, ask for a different investor owner. So the TOPA model would be a perfect way in which to expand into cooperative ownership.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Wu may have had to leave for another meeting. I'm just checking my text messages. Councillor Baker also may have had to step off. So Councillor Flynn had noted he was leaving early. So Councillor Mejia.
Yes, thank you. Thank you again. So I just have a few questions in regards to if would be helpful for folks who are tuning in. If anyone could just give us a quick definition of what a co-op is. I think oftentimes everybody...
We, not to interrupt, this kind of questioning was for DND specifically.
Oh, DND, okay. Sorry.
Because of the time limit.
All right. Let me go to DND. How do new developments indicate they would like to build co-op? Is that even an option?
Teresa?
Yeah, through our request for proposals, it's really the developers it's their idea, it's their vision. We work with nonprofits and even for-profit developers who are working within a community. For example, they may own a site or they may looking at a site for development of housing. I think you guys are aware that, they're often talking to the community members and talking to the folks in the community about what they would like to see there. That planning process, they usually come in and discuss with you guys and with D&D about what they would like to do as far as development of housing is concerned. And it's so that the development is shaped very early on by what's available under request for proposals, what the community wants to see. And I think we need to remind the development community that cooperatives are in fact an option, and that it does provide this kind of hybrid between ownership and multifamily rental. And so, I think we just need to kind of emphasize that again as a possibility.
Thank you. And I'm just curious, someone mentioned earlier, I think it may have been Teresa, back to you, in regards to the RFP process, that you provide preference for co-ops. What does that mean?
Well, what it means is that it's a way of encouraging development, frankly. We are providing the resources out to the general development community, that if they want to see their housing built and achieve the affordability that they're hoping for, they can apply to us for resources. And by stating that there's a preference for, say, cooperative home ownership, form of ownership, or elder housing, or some other form of housing, we can send the signal out to the development community that this is what the city is hoping to get developed. And so it's a way of broadcasting what the desires are of the city of Boston.
Yeah, thank you for that. And my last question will be for Maureen. It would not be a good public hearing unless I ask a question about language access. So I'm just curious, in terms of interpretation and translation and, the workshops, can you just talk to me a little bit about what that looks like in terms of accessibility to other communities that may not, English may not be their first language?
Sure. And I'll talk a little bit, and I'll let Karen add on as well. So all of our materials have been translated. All of our applications have been translated into, I believe, and Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it 10 languages? 11. So I could read Karen's lips. So I'm getting used to that now. So all of our applications are in 11 languages. Our website, the website content has been translated as well. When we do drop-in counseling, we have a translator available, and our homebuyer ed classes, I'm not sure how many are conducted in Spanish. We used to have them conducted in Spanish and Mandarin, but Karen, do you know specifically? We could get back to you if
Yeah, no, we also work with the CHAPA group, and CHAPA, a lot of the nonprofits do offer several first-time home buyer classes in different languages: Mandarin, Spanish, Haitian. So there is a lot of accessibility for first-time home buyers in different languages.
That is great. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm so happy I'm not even going to ask you any more questions. How about that?
Okay.
Counselor Janey?
Hi. Yeah, just quickly, and to build on Counselor
Janey?
She's frozen.
I think we lost her.
Oh. We'll come back to Counselor Janey. I'll just check and see if Counselor Flaherty had any quick questions for DND. You may have also gone. I see Counselor Bach. Counselor Bach, did you have questions for DND?
Yeah, sorry, I had one more, and I thought since...
Oh,
Oh, you just muted me. All right, I'm back.
Lower your hand. I'm so sorry.
No worries. I just thought since we're waiting for the council president to come back, I might just insert one more, which is just to ask, you know, I think one of my frustrations with this area, and Matt and John alluded to it, is that, you know, with affordable housing, so often we're trying to fill a gap in terms of financing, but with co-ops, it's separate from a gap. There's just this question of kind of backstopping or a guarantee, because actually like the numbers add up, but it's just that people aren't quite willing to take the risk. And to me, that's a really great place for the city and for public finance to play a role, because ultimately there's an opportunity for some kind of revolving fund to guarantee these things and help get them off the ground without actually losing city capital, right? Because it's not like pouring it into gap filler for an affordable housing project. And so that's and it's something that we as the city are kind of in a position to do from a public finance perspective. So I just wanted to know if DND has had that conversation, obviously maybe with Treasury, or and like whether any ideas on that front have been floated, because it's something else I'd like us to explore.
I guess I'll take, yes. We have been and are continuing to explore it. There's a couple of different avenues. When a new, especially for a new cooperative ownership, it is a struggle for a bank because the corporation itself is brand new as well, right? So they don't have any real balance sheet and other than the property itself and the value that's there, it does make it difficult for a lending institution to take that leap of faith. So that, yes, the possibility of offering a loan guarantee of some form or another, again, you know, depending upon how you structure the guarantee, how much you have to set aside for that, it's something that we are looking at as a possibility, and that's for the blanket mortgage or the larger loan that's on the property itself to the corporation, but as well as you know, we were trying to think of different ways in which if we were to provide down payment and closing cost assistance to someone for their share, is there some, because we can't take a security in the property as we normally would, is there some other level of security that we could look for? And that would be the guarantee from the corporation, the co-op corporation itself, to guarantee similar to what we would do for the blanket mortgage. So yeah, we're looking at that as definitely, and then what that would mean financially and how you would have to structure it, I think is probably, we'd have to have some conversations with Treasury and a few other folks.
Great. Well, I would love for us to be pursuing that. I think it's so key. And I also would love to be pursuing the question of whether we're attaching right of first refusals for tenants to our city financed affordable housing deals, since that's a space, you know, an ecosystem outside of the TOPA at the state level that we could maybe help control. But thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I only had one quick note about that, specifically on BPDA land and properties that they are also, I mean, we do technically attach a transfer fee or some sort of value capture in the Navy Yard in Charlestown. So they can only sell, and the first X percentage of their sell price goes back to the city or BPDA. So as we're developing and as we're looking at more development that's going to be owned by quasi-government agencies like the BPDA in Charlestown and throughout, if we couldn't do exactly what Councilor Bach had just mentioned with those kinds of properties. And honestly, I thought about it for public housing, but I think there's a mission to keep public housing forever publicly owned and in that space, right? But definitely when we're looking at anything that's developed by the BPDA going forward, the Chain Forge, all of these different properties to be done. So I'm hoping that we can consider that right of first refusal for the tenants as well. I know we don't have anyone from the BPDA here, but I think that that's something we could work out. So I'm going to go ahead and push through the next panel of folks to speak, and then I'm going to go back through all of the questions, or for all my colleagues to go through and ask questions again for everybody. Now that we have a history on co-ops, we have some of the top issues that's preventing them from being developed, and now we're going to really speak to the financing of cooperatives from those and the expert of those fields. So on the next panel, we have Maggie Cohen, Loan and Outreach Officer for the Cooperative Fund of New England. We have Jared Tunnell, Senior Vice President of the National Cooperative Bank. We have Casey Fannin from the President of the National Cooperative Bank. And we have Grant Young, who's the trustee of the Symphony Area Renaissance. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to our first speaker, Maggie Cohn.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Thank you, Councillor Bach, for calling this hearing. And I've totally lost track of what other councillors are still on the call. But thank you all for being here. Thank you, Sheila Dillon, for being here as well. Is she still here? Is she gone? So as Lydia said, my name is Maggie Cohn. I'm a loan officer with the Cooperative Fund of New England. The Cooperative Fund of New England is a community development financial institution founded in 1975 for the specific purpose of making loans available to cooperatives. We lend to co-ops in all sectors across New England and into New York State. We lend to housing co-ops, consumer co-ops such as food co-ops, worker-owned cooperatives, and farming, fishing, and artist cooperatives. There was a need then, and there is still a need for CF&E because traditional underwriting really limits the ability of many banks to finance housing co-ops. Well, any co-ops really, but we're here talking about housing co-ops. In Boston, we are all really well aware that housing co-ops, especially limited equity co-ops, are a proven way for people of all income levels to stay in the city as housing costs continue to climb. They stabilize families and they stabilize communities. CF&E has financed many housing cooperatives, including what we call group equity and what Matt referred to as zero equity cooperatives, where equity may accrue to the entity that purchases the house, but not to the individuals, although the individuals are the governing body for the cooperative. Also apartment cooperatives and mobile home cooperatives. Matt and John actually pretty clearly laid out the strengths of housing co-ops and many of the varied needs that they have for financing. So I will be extremely brief. We see three basic buckets of financing need: financing for the down payment, financing for shares, and accessing necessary support services. So first is access for funds to cover or help cover the 20% of a purchase price that the buyer has to contribute. When the cooperative fund finances the purchase of property, we will fund at 80% loan to value. But the buyers, the cooperative, still needs to come up with that 20%. And especially for lower income individuals who are attempting to stabilize their housing through participation in a cooperative, finding the funds to cover that down payment on a property purchase can be daunting. Those most in need of housing often lack the family wealth on which many of us have been able to rely. The second area is access to loans to purchase shares. I think we've heard a lot about that. And while we can make a loan to the cooperative entity to purchase the property, by our bylaws, we cannot lend to individuals. So we are restricted from making share loans. That means then that the applicants, the individual applicants to the co-op, have to come up with all or most of the share purchase price themselves. We have made loans to housing co-ops who create an internal fund from which the co-op can make loans to individuals who need support in purchasing their share. But that's helpful. It's really not adequate to meet the situation. And then often we are already maxing out our ability to lend, and we're maxing out the co-op's ability to repay a loan just to finance the mortgage on the property. So we have limited additional lending capacity, and they have limited additional repayment capacity. So there's a clear gap there. And the last is, as was mentioned before, the assistance to pay for property management and accounting services, capital needs assessment, overseeing necessary improvements, and so forth. Smaller, limited, and group equity co-ops in particular often manage their own property. This includes the bookkeeping and the accounting. If there are not people in the co-op with the right skill set, and this does happen, with all the best intentions of the world, maintenance issues and financial issues may slide. So access to those services is really critical to maintain the building and keep the cooperative sustainable. So financing the purchase of the property is only one step. There are lenders out there who will assist with that, not banks, but other community development finance institutions, CFNE, LEAF, the National Co-op Bank, who is here, also will assist with that. But the share prices, the corollary expenses, coming up with down payment assistance, those are all needs which it's very difficult for a cooperative or for individuals in a cooperative to have met within the traditional lending system. Organizing a co-op really does take longer than organizing individual asset purchases, but when people can pool their money, that makes those asset purchases accessible to people further down the economic ladder. And I want to reiterate, so I don't remember who said this, but co-ops really are more resilient, especially during economic downturns. We have a 98.5% repayment rate and a 75% rate of borrower survival dating back to our founding in '75. So co-ops really are efforts well deserving of assistance from the city. And I look forward to having future conversations with some of you about some of these things. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I believe we've been joined by Councilor Janey, who I don't know if we somehow got disconnected, but Councilor Janey, if you had a question for D&D. I'm sorry to catch you. I'm sorry. If you want, I can have the panelists finish in this one and you can answer, or you can ask if you'd like.
Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
It was just quick, and it was a follow-up. I'm sorry, I had technical issues and got frozen. And I know D&D has a time constraint. So it was just a quick follow-up to Councilor Mejia's question around the how. And I heard the response around the development team should do blah, blah, blah. So I guess my question is, are there opportunities for conversion? Is this something that there's an appetite or interest in terms of looking at our current developments that are kind of grouped and similar, like public housing, or is public housing for the public good that we want to keep public versus co-op? So I'm just wondering if there are other opportunities to convert, or is it always around some sort of new development?
I think this is Tim Davis. Conversion is most likely when there is a change in the situation of the property, meaning that there is an existing owner, whether it was a for-profit building that's going to be converted to income restricted, or it is an existing income restricted building where the original developer is leaving and there's a refinance and restructuring. Those are the moments when that can be thought of. And I think what we need is an ecosystem whereby tenants are aware of the possibilities of that and given the tools to be able to make those changes when there's a conversion.
That makes sense. And just to clarify on that, thank you, Tim. So it is not residents have organized themselves and 70% of the residents have determined this is the best step for them. So it's not them organizing themselves. It's some sort of change in the existing ownership structure.
Yeah, and there are co-ops that were created very much by the tenants organizing. So I think that is very much, I think if tenant organizers are working with buildings where there is the possibility of a conversion from a private owner to their ownership, then I think that is something we should be supporting.
Oh, wonderful. And then just the question around public housing and public housing being for the public good. And what I tend to believe is that it takes all of these to make up this beautiful mosaic that we need public housing, we need the co-ops, we need single families, we need multifamilies, we need we need all of these, a mix to move forward in terms of really dealing with our housing crisis. So if you could just speak to public housing and whether or not there's interest or appetite, or there are strong reasons why not to look at public housing, please say that as well.
Right. We don't have the BHA here on the call, so I can't speak exactly for them, but I know that has not been their practice. When they have done, I do not know if there are specific regulations that prohibit it, and maybe Teresa does. My first housing project I was ever involved in was not a public housing, but it was BHA owned property, meaning they had acquired it from HUD that was converted to a limited equity co-op. And so that was where the tenants did actually organize and asked the BHA to sell them the property. But that was not pure public housing. That was just a property that the BHA had managed to put in their portfolio. That was 25 years ago. So that has happened. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate you, Madam Chair, for indulging me in my technical difficulties, and want to say congrats to the maker. I believe this is your maiden speech. So just wanted to shout you out and say congrats. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. We'll just go on to Jared Tunnell.
I was going to ask that the president of the bank kind of do an introduction for us, if that's okay.
Okay, we'll start with Casey Fannin then.
Yep.
Hi, thank you, everybody. It's been very great to hear everyone talk so many and say so many great things about co-ops. I'm the president of National Cooperative Bank. National Cooperative Bank is a unique bank that has been chartered by an act of the United States Congress to really serve a dual mandate. And one is to promote and provide financial services and products to cooperatives across the country, and the second is to support low to moderate income communities across the country. Today, NCB is the largest lender to housing cooperatives in the country. I'm glad to say we do provide the financing that everyone today has been talking about. NCB provides construction financing on new housing cooperative developments. We do provide refinances on maturing loans to existing cooperatives. We've been working with several groups with conversions, and we also provide share loans across the country. I think John and Matt did an outstanding job just defining what a cooperative is, so I won't go into what a cooperative is. I will just highlight a couple elements that I think are important to just drive home and the importance of cooperative housing. First is, clear, but it's home ownership. That creates stability in a community more so than anything. And that stability provided by a cooperative is, I think, a little different. It's more nuanced than single family home ownership. I think you've got the strength of the cooperative to support each other. And that really, it presents itself in a pride of ownership. And there's been comments made about, how co-ops outperform other forms of housing in times of economic stress. And NCB in our loan portfolio has been an example of that. Our co-op portfolio outperformed that of our competitors' non-cooperative portfolios in the housing crisis, more than a decade ago. And I'm happy to say right now, during the pandemic, NCB's portfolio is outperformed the national average of deferrals and forbearances. We're at half the national average. So, not only as Matt mentioned, co-ops, one member, one vote, but to a degree they're, one for all for one. And I think that really supports a cooperative in times of it supports the members in times of economic distress. They're there to help each other. Limited equity housing cooperatives do all of that I just said, but they're also there for the little guy. Some of the market rate co-ops, which we do, a large amount, are wonderful in their own right. The limited equity co-ops they do a little bit more. And I think the success is proven out by the waiting lists that exist for limited equity housing co-ops across the country. In Boston, New York, Washington, Chicago, we've seen, hundreds of people on waiting lists to gain access to limited equity housing co-ops. So the demand is there. Why? It's a safe, affordable home ownership form where the purchase price to enter into these co-ops is affordable. I will echo that there are some challenges. In my opinion, the biggest challenge in financing is the small balance share loan for limited equity owners. NCB's tried to work with, and we provide share loans across the country, but that small balance loan is a challenging loan. We've worked with groups across the country, including UHAB, which was mentioned earlier, where and other CDFIs that will provide that small balance share loan, with National Cooperative Bank providing loans to the CDFI. So essentially, we would be the capital to fuel those unique lending programs. Other things to focus on, I think, Technical assistance, particularly that of governance, is critical. I think, creating a rich environment and vibrant community of CDFIs to help, early formation of cooperatives is critical. I think, as has been said, and patient capital, I think it is a great use of public funds to support these, new co-ops. And, it's important to know that we're not talking grants. We're not talking about, we could be talking about guarantees. But we've seen the most success are where cities are providing subordinated debt to support and to fill that gap in new co-op creation. And that's capital that, earns an interest rate for the benefit of the public. And is, in my opinion, a very safe loan if everything else is done correctly, particularly, the technical assistance on the governance side. I would say that, I think Councilmember Flynn had mentioned he was interested in seeing what other groups around the country, other cities around the country are doing. NCB and others have been very active in the District of Columbia, who, like yourselves, have really shown a great deal of interest in limited equity cooperatives. And if I could mention, I'd direct you all to dchousing.coop. They have done similar work and have engaged some research and have developed a list of recommendations that the district is considering, and it's a different city, but has many of the same housing issues as Boston. I'd also like to mention that NCB has been very active in Massachusetts. Boston, less so on the new co-op creation, but in Massachusetts there is a pretty rich cooperative new co-op creation, particularly in the manufactured housing communities. And I think what can we learn from that? What can we learn from those new co-ops in the state? And I would say that tenant involvement, strong CDFI support, some CDFI capital in bank capital. And it's been a robust market, and it hasn't, because of the nature of manufactured housing, I don't think it's stretched into the city of Boston, but certainly in the suburbs around it, there's been a growing number of housing co-ops. And once again, long lists of people trying to get in that. It's a stabilizing force in the community, and it's had high success. So that's all I have. It's been great to participate and listen to all the wonderful voices and smart people on this Zoom. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you wanted us to, I didn't know if Jared, if you had something to add, or if you would be just here to answer questions.
Yeah, I can add that, my role is really more on the ground, and I represent the team of lenders that can help co-ops, in your metro area that are looking for capital improvement loans, that are looking for refinancing. I can also be a clearinghouse if you have individuals looking for information about share loans. I can put them in touch with the right individual. And to Casey's point, I mean, we're the largest lender in the country, and so we're very active and always looking for for new business. But it is a pretty unique product, a co-op. There's a lot more condominiums and homeowners associations than there are. So it's sometimes it's better for us to get the word out to try and let people find us. It's really hard for us to find them a lot of times if it's not somebody already on our radar screen. So be happy to follow up afterwards with my information if you want to use me as a clearinghouse, if anybody has information or has interest in having us explore helping them out.
Thank you. Just for, I think because we're all city councilors and we really can't promote banks and whatnot, but I think what would be great is that you're out there and available to partner with the city or to work with the city on programs and ways in which, because correct me if I'm wrong, Tim or Teresa, what we often do is we have a lot of lender partners that help support our program. So maybe that's something we can think about, especially if you just mentioned individual, share loans and programs.
We have some educational materials. You know, as Casey said, we're a mission-based organization. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we're able to use resources differently than your traditional bank could. So we spend a considerable amount of resources on creating educational materials and getting the word out about co-ops and what's possible. So what I can do is follow up with council members' box office and give them some of those educational materials that we have about, you know, how to be a co-op member and, you know, what to do if you're looking to buy a co-op into a co-op. I'll forward that information out there, and, you know, again, just for general public use.
We'd love to follow up with you as well.
Right.
After the hearing. Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you, Teresa, and thank you, DND. So without further ado, I apologize, Grant. This is Grant Young from the Trustee of the Symphony Area Renaissance
Trust. Yes. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, and I'd like to appreciate Councilor Bach's order for this. My name is Grant Young. I live in the East Fenway, and I'm a trustee of the Symphony Area Renaissance Trust, or as we sometimes say, SART. For the past 34 years, I've lived in Belmont Chambers Cooperative and was a founding member. I'd like to talk a little bit about the share loan financing for cooperatives. Belmont Chambers was created with help from the city and the National Cooperative Bank, working with community groups to trying to reclaim the East Fenway neighborhood after a wave of arson for profit in the 1970s. SART was formed by these groups with two purposes: to guarantee the long-term affordability of Belmont Chambers by enforcing the limited equity nature of the co-op, and to provide share loans to prospective members of Belmont Chambers. The City of Boston assisted SART with a UDAG grant that was loaned to SART to be used as share loans for Belmont Chambers Cooperative. Normally, as we've heard, applicants must pay the full cost of a cooperative share, which puts it out of reach of most people who meet low and moderate income guidelines. For about the price of a new car, a nice car sometimes, share loans can bridge the divide from renter to homeowner. For limited equity cooperatives like ours, the biggest problem with maintaining affordability and respecting the income limits for cooperative applicants is the lack of available share loan financing. Cooperatives need to be a party to the loan as they're nominally landlords for their members, and if they need to be foreclosed, the cooperative needs to get involved. For this reason, share loans are more complex legally than mortgages and are a niche product for banks to offer, as we've heard. In rare cases, market rate co-ops have forged unique relationships with particular bank officers to offer share loans, but this has not resulted in a wider availability of share loans for limited equity cooperatives. SART wants to use our unique experience of over 30 years managing share loans to fund share loans for cooperatives in the Fenway area. We are working with the city to invest the proceeds of the Belmont Chambers loans into what would be the first permanent share loan fund for cooperatives in the city. Our initial scope is limited by our available resources and the familiarity with co-ops in our neighborhood, but we hope that our work will attract additional resources from banks and community development finance institutions and allow us to expand our services to other cooperatives, housing cooperatives, as well as provide technical assistance and education about cooperatives. We know there's a need for a nonprofit revolving permanent fund for share loans and that it can become self-sustaining. We also support the tenant option to purchase bill that would allow tenants to organize to form their own cooperatives when landlords decide to sell their building. The success of such tenant options to purchase depends on the availability of financing to match purchase offers in a timely way. A share loan fund could be a critical piece of the success of such tenant initiatives by leveraging blanket mortgages from banks. Let's see. I was going to go into a big pitch about housing cooperatives, but everybody has done that here, and it seems to be a pretty receptive audience. So I would just like to say that even without ongoing subsidies, cooperatives tend to be less expensive over the long term. The affordability and community engagement features of cooperatives help build the kind of neighborhoods where families can thrive. We appreciate the Department of Neighborhood Development's ongoing support of cooperatives and hope to continue to expand cooperatives as a housing option for the citizens of Boston. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to now just start going through questions, and the questions will be for my colleagues, for everybody, and for the panelists. For those of you who may feel that you have an answer to a question, it may not be directed to you. If you could just mark your blue hand so I can call on you. So for example, if I asked about financing and D&D responds, but it's a Grant or Jared or if someone or Maggie feels that they could add to that as an opportunity, please just raise your blue hand so I know to pull you or call on you. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start from the top with our the lead sponsor, Councillor Bach.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Edwards. And thank you to everyone on the finance panel. I think it's very encouraging to think that a lot of the expertise on this does exist, and that as we think about how to build up on the city side support for this, that there are real resources that you all represent. And Grant, I love the idea of a revolving share loan fund. So that's exciting, and I'd love to follow up on that. I guess just one question, and this is maybe in particular for Maggie and the folks from the National Co-op Bank. I think Casey touched on the DC website, and we'll definitely go check that out. But if there are things that that are just more common other places besides Boston, I mean, I know that in New York, co-ops are just an enormous world, and just if there's things that that haven't come up today or that have come up today, but you really want to pinpoint because they're really crucial. I just want to make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel here when there's successful experiences in other places.
This is Casey. One thing is, a centralized, hub in the city for everything co-op. I think that there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and I think, a phone tree of, 10 phone numbers is confusing to a consumer and a developer. So I think a centralized, location where everything co-op can be covered by the city. And then, loan programs, be it on the underlying, gap mortgage side, or, there's been discussion about share loans. Those are some things that, and then, TOPA is certainly a driving force in conversions. Those are the things that would jump out in my mind.
I would say that what jumps out in my mind is that people don't have trouble buying shares in cooperatives in New York City. So there's clearly a different understanding of co-ops and a different lending environment. I have not found anyone in New York, and I have not actively pursued this, that I can really talk to find out what the big difference is. But I think it would certainly be worth following up with people in the city to get more information about the lending that happens in New York for people to buy into cooperatives.
Great. Councilor Bob?
No, thank you both. That was really helpful.
Councilor Braden?
I'm really intrigued about the potential possibilities in this. The big issue out here, I think, is it's all over the city. The cost of land, the cost of housing. I'm wondering to be more. How can we be proactive in terms of identifying potential co-op possibilities and setting it up or exploring ways that we can incentivize and make it happen, you know, rather than just hang around and wait for somebody to come forward with, oh, I'm thinking I might do a co-op. Is there a way that we can really push this concept a bit more vigorously?
Could I respond to that? I think the tremendous and immediate opportunity is TOPA. And we are working very, very hard to get the Enabling Act in the legislature passed. Once that happens, the council is going to have to adopt the local ordinance for TOPA. If, unfortunately, that does not happen, if this bill dies, then the next thing the council can and hope will do is pass a home rule petition to establish TOPA for the city of Boston. Once that happens, and I think Tim Davis certainly underscored it, the city really is going to have to invest in our tenant organizing, community organizing infrastructure, because it's going to be those organizations that are going to be able to reach out to tenants, to educate them about their rights, to connect them with the technical assistance, to help organize them. And this is you know, there are significant costs there. To start with, all of the community organizations that would be playing this role are going to need some training themselves. So I think you know, if TOPA passes, there will be no shortage of opportunities to create co-ops, but the city really does need to be prepared to invest in the not only in the funding to finance the co-ops or even non-co-ops that could come out of TOPA, but also to invest in building the capacity of tenants and their advocates to capitalize on this law.
Thank you. I see John Seward's hand is raised, so I will call on John, and then after John, we're going to go ahead, if it's okay, Councilor Braden, to check in with other councilors for questions.
That's fine.
Okay.
Councilor Edwards, thank you. To add to what Matt had said, there are some proactive opportunities for Boston here. I've seen some real estate analysis which suggests that something on the order of 30% of multifamily properties will be in danger of foreclosure and sale in the near future because of the financial crisis that attends the pandemic. Once upon a time, Boston was quite proactive in combating arson by identifying the areas and types of buildings that were most likely to be burnt and reaching out to the owners of those buildings. Boston could do something similar to identify properties most likely to go up for sale in the near future and reach out to them and to suggest the possibility of teaming with the city and residents purchasing the buildings. TOPA at root grants the residents a seat at the table when the owner wants to sell. It doesn't guarantee the sale to residents or transfer into affordability. And because of the legislation of TOPA, there are some really tight timeframes required for tenants to organize and to make their expression of interest in the property, and then to carry out a series of milestones on timetable that concludes with the purchase of the property. There are many opportunities for failure in that process, and one way to get ahead of that would be to do some early proactive organizing of tenants so that people are already constituted and thinking about purchasing the property and what's involved in it before the properties come on the market. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I have a couple questions, and I think the other counselors maybe have had to step out earlier. Counselor Mejia, do you have some questions as well?
Yes, I do have a few questions. I know earlier I asked some questions about if anyone here could define co-op, and I'm also curious about, I only been to one co-op in my life, so I don't know much about them, but what I do know,
background noise.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You know, I have really bad internet at my house, and I have to work with what I have, and right now this is the best that I can do. But I'll try to be really quick. I'm just curious if everyone could be quiet on the scene here so I can handle my business. I'm curious about the diversity. I know that there's some co-ops that I only went to one co-op, and it was not as diverse as I would have hoped it would be. So can we just talk a little bit about how we're going to ensure that during this process we can, you know, have more racial and economic diversity? I'm just curious about what, if any, possibilities exist about making it more accessible to low-income people of color.
Great questions. I think, Matt, you had a very good, concise definition of a housing co-op.
Yeah.
Or Counselor Mejia, and then we can turn over to folks to talk about accessibility by people of color, low-income individuals.
Okay, so a co-op is a corporation that owns residential property. And the stockholders in the corporation, the people that own the corporation, are basically the people who are going to live in the co-op, and so they are owners of the housing by owning the stock, but the bigger corporation owns the whole housing, and the stockholders or the members of the co-op or the shareholders are actually renting a unit of housing from the cooperative that they are a shareholder in. So they are both renters and owners. You know, and so as I've been saying, as in my remark, it's kind of a hybrid of rental housing and ownership, you know, and what I often say is it has the best features of both renting and ownership. I'll let someone else take the diversity question. I think we can. Co-ops that are going to be assisted by the city will be subject to all of the fair housing and affirmative marketing that applies to any other city-assisted housing.
Thank you for reaffirming that, Matt. That is true. And I think the other piece of this is that most of the home buyers that are in our Home Buyer 101 classes are buyers of color. And most of the, I think 70 or 80% of the buyers that we help through our down payment assistance and closing cost assistance program are also buyers of color. So the classes, because we will be teaching about co-ops in the classes, that will naturally be spread through our lower income communities, our first generation home buyers, and our buyers of color. It'll happen through our classes, and our so that is a way to make hopefully the membership of the newer co-ops or the conversion co-ops diverse. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Kenzie's seeming to think so. So as long as Kenzie, it makes sense to Kenzie, that's all that really matters at the end of the day. So it's all good.
I think it's also really important to note that many of the limited equity, I think the limited equity co-ops in Boston, very many of them are in neighborhoods that are like Warren Gardens, South End Cooperative Housing, which I worked with, is almost entirely households of color within a neighborhood that's not as diverse as it used to be. So I think that it's important to note that these limited equity co-ops, by and large, are generally very diverse now.
We have two hands raised, one from Councillor Bach and one from John Stewart to also answer this question. And then we'll, I'm going to ask some questions too. Go ahead, Councillor Bach and then John.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to jump in on this because I think what Councillor Mejia has raised is a really key point, and it's one of the reasons why I'm passionate about this and also about specifically what Grant brought up. So basically, precisely because a lot of banks are not lending to folks for these share loans, what ends up, and because, you know, you can't use like the property itself as a guarantee, like what ends up happening too often if we don't have financial support for low-income folks and folks of color and to like help with these limited equity shares is that the buy-in to a co-op isn't accessible to somebody who doesn't have some personal or family like wealth, right? And so I think that's why what Grant was describing is so key, and why I think city support here is so key. In the same time, in exactly the same way as a microcosm of what we do for first-time home buyers, making sure that that we can get people on that first rung on the ladder here with co-ops and being creative about financing that, I think is so important. And I see in my district, Charles Bank is a super diverse co-op that just has really shown what it looks like, Councillor Mejia, like when these really are accessible to a wide range of folks. But and to Tim's point, there's a lot of those existing ones around the city. But I think that's exactly why when we talk about cooperative finance and lowering barriers, we're not just talking about how to lower the barrier for the blanket mortgage and for acquiring the initial building. We've got to be talking about how do you lower the barrier for those specific individuals, people of color, you know, people of limited means to get in on the ground floor of these co-ops, because that's the real, you know, meaning of equity in this context. So I just wanted to thank you for the question and say, I think all of the technical financial stuff that we're talking about here has to be aiming towards exactly that end.
Thank you. John?
Yes, so I want to agree with Matt that all co-ops have to abide by all fair housing laws and anti-discrimination regulations. And also we have seen the problem that Councillor Mejia refers to in our highly affordable and limited equity co-ops, where people who are approved to join are unable to gather the financial resources to join. And even though the co-op wants to be diverse and wants to represent the wider community around it, we do see the population of the co-ops trending older and whiter, more professional, coming from greater means. And that's quite concerning to us. We have an example in Cambridgeport. We're a highly affordable co-op whose share price is below $50,000. Still a big check for a lot of us to write, even though it's a tenth of the average one-bedroom condo in Cambridge or Boston. They saved enough reserves within the co-op that they would extend a loan for half of the share purchase price to a new owner or purchaser. And that's wonderful, but it doesn't bring the bar down completely. The Alexander Magnolia co-op in Dorchester, now on the Indigo line, was originally funded with a no longer existing HUD program, and they were able to offer shares in their houses at $1 equity. And that was wonderful at the time, but it's led to tremendous problems now, decades later, when they need substantial capital improvements and do not have the banking history, capital reserves, or deep pockets among their residents. So this has to be balanced.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and ask some questions, and we'll go through another round if need be, for folks to continue to ask questions.
Councilor Edwards, can I just interrupt with a technical question? I do not know how to raise a blue hand, so if I want to speak, I don't know how to get anybody's attention.
On my screen, it depends on the device you have, but mine allows for you to click on more at the bottom. I don't know, but if not, then
I am not there. I do not have a more at the bottom.
I don't know what device, but
it may be in your upper corner of your picture.
No, it's not there either. I did look there.
Do you have a participants button?
Yes.
So if you click that at the bottom of the pop-out that comes there, you might see something that says raise hand.
It says. Okay.
That's it.
Thank you very much. I'll shut up now.
No, it's quite all right. Thank you. So just some streams of ideas also for the city and thoughts around how to expand cooperatives through our already existing systems. One, we're dealing with a very important vote this Thursday on Suffolk Downs. 31% of the units will be ownership. And so here we're talking about another opportunity to expand a massive amount of ownership or the middle class in Boston. And so I'm sure many of those units will be subject to our first-time homeowner programs and so on and so forth. So how are we making sure that co-ops are ready to be part of owning some of this future, right? And how are we now? We have time because they haven't built these units yet. But when those units start to go up for sale, are we making sure that we're building a capacity or a culture or an understanding of lending so that people could purchase, an LLC could come in and buy 3 or 4 or triple decker or several townhouses as a co-op? How are we doing that? Because they're going to be built. That's one thing. The other thing in general for PDAs, as we're doing our zoning, how are we making sure that when we do large zoning plans, PDAs apply to 1 acre or more, that we're not also, again, making sure there's ownership, that co-ops are part of that conversation from our zoning perspective or from just in general, just getting people ready for as these things are coming up. I just think these are opportunities that we want as the city to, we see them for one way, but another opportunity, that's all. And then finally, 3 more things. REM, I think real estate management, there are times where people lose their homes due to non-payment of taxes, and the city then becomes the kind of, caretaker. The city has no intention of keeping these properties, but how do we make sure, is it possible to make sure that if a triple decker comes into the city's hands, that there's a right of first refusal for cooperatives, right? If there are tenants, especially in that building. So, right? How do we, that happens? It's not often, but there could be a house or a triple decker or a double, that we want to make sure that if the city gets something like this due to tax foreclosure, right? And I know that hopefully we don't get many of them because Maureen's shop does such a good job of preventing it. This is not okay, but there are some times, and that's honest to God, that's very true. And I've also passed legislation to also further help expand payment plans, but there are times where there may not be, after all those efforts, there might be a house. City owns it. How do we make sure co-ops get access to that? In line, at least for that. BPDA land, I mentioned that before, I just want to bring it up again, to bring those partners in there, in as much as it's owned or they're about to build. I know for the parking lots near Bunker Hill Housing, or Bunker Hill T Station, those huge parking lots, they're looking at building that and building housing there. That's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But again, they're about to build. If they're going to make any kind of ownership transfer and put other restrictions on it, deed restrictions, how do we put on right of first refusal for the tenants? Okay. And then finally, just to answer also Councilor Mejia's question about diversity and also making sure that we're planning in a way that assures that people of lower means, people of color, people who are often segregated have access to that. We are in the middle of drafting and finalizing a historic zoning amendment to affirmatively further fair housing. I'm very happy about that. So with all of those things coming into mind and planning and thinking about ways in which we can bring people together, and also change the laws in order to make sure that we're doing more than just not discriminating, but actually promoting affirmatively integrated communities or neighborhoods. That's the language we're working on right now in that zoning amendment, and it will be historic and we'll be the first city in the country to have it. So those are just some ideas I had based off of this conversation and already existing systems that we have. I see Casey Fannin has raised his hand.
So on your point on city-owned property, New York City has converted hundreds of cooperatives, that they took ownership of. It's an effective way to get it back on the tax rolls. It's been done predominantly through the Department of Housing and Preservation in New York City. They've had financing programs that provided a guarantee and put out as an RFP for developers, traditionally nonprofit, but not all, to facilitate the conversion of those properties to cooperative ownership. Most times those buildings are occupied by tenants, and those tenants are usually victims of pretty bad landlords. And so they've had a very motivated community of tenants that with some guidance have been able to become co-op owners. And the city of New York has done that to several hundred co-ops.
That's good. Good model to look at then. So I am time limited personally myself till about 4:15, but Kenzie Bach is is the vice chair of the committee. So I'm happy to go back to start I think a second round of questions for colleagues. If Councilor Bach, you wanted to lead that off, and at 4:15, if I have to go, then you would continue the conversation.
Sure. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. No, I mean, I'm happy to stay here and chair and run discussion as long as folks are available. But I'll just say for my part, I don't have a whole bunch more questions. I think I'm really kind of oriented towards action on this. I think I really appreciated Maureen talking about some of the immediate things we could do to branch off of the first-time homebuyer front. And I'd really like us also to sort of turn that question about how to provide those first-time share loans into reality. How do we support, as Grant referenced, a kind of revolving fund, right? It seems like we could both do something on the city side, support something on the nonprofit side. I'd love to follow up on the conversations kind of with Treasury about the public finance piece. And I think the right of first refusal aspect that Councilor Edwards brought up, and then this broader question about city land and how are we sort of putting this co-op option on the table every time we're thinking about community development in the city is a kind of broader framework that I hope we can move forward on. But it feels like there are some very concrete action steps, and that a lot of the people who are here today, I hope are going to be conversation partners in those. So I'm excited to keep going, and maybe we're circling back with a working session in a few months just to catch up on concrete things that the D&D and others have done. So that's kind of where my headspace is, Councilor Edwards. But as you say, I'm very happy to chair any questions from colleagues or public testimony that we've got in the next hour.
Thank you. Councilor Braden?
I don't have any further questions at this time. I've got lots to think about here. I really look forward to continuing this conversation, perhaps in a working session or something going forward, just to make sure we keep the pot on the stove, so to speak.
Wonderful. Thank you. Councilor Mejia.
No, I'm sorry for being so noisy and disruptive, but I don't have any other questions, and really have learned a lot from this process. So looking forward to learning a little bit more, and being engaged in the dialogue. And thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I'm just gonna say thank you, and I will absolutely follow up with a working session where we could discuss either some pilots or how we're streamlining some of these conversations into immediate action in the city. I think what we've learned today is there's a lot more partners than we knew that are out there ready, willing, and able to kind of merge with already good programming at the city. Thank you, D&D, for coming out here to talk about those programs and how they can be enhanced through a cooperative lens and making sure that we have them at the table. And I think I heard a commitment that's only going to increase, that co-ops will be at the table for all aspects of development and planning and first time and ownership in the City of Boston's program. So unless there's any other concluding remarks, I'm actually going to go ahead and conclude today's hearing, and we will schedule a working session.
Make sure you gavel us out. You got to gavel us out.
I'll just clap like this because I don't have a gavel. Bravo, bravo. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the panelists.
Thank you, all counselors. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. This is a very exciting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Now we've got to get TOPA passed. That's the next thing.
Oh, yes. How do we get that done? We have to storm the State House.
Conference committee attached to the Economic Development Bill as H-1260, still alive.
We can send you all the names of the conference committee members, and if you know them, call them. That is the most important thing to happen right now.
That would be very helpful.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Thanks for doing this, Kenzie. Counselor Bach.
Thanks, Maggie.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Kenzie.
Bye, Julia. Thanks for being on.
Yep. Always here to support you.